welcome back to Mind, Body, and Beyonds. Today we're discussing the stress cycle, how your body responds to stress, and how that affects you, your thoughts, and your emotions, and therefore your reality. The first thing we need to understand is that your brain is not hardwired. New neurons are constantly being created through a process called neurogenesis, and you can change your biology and your reality by changing your thoughts. The neurons in your brain are constantly making new connections, new synapses, new pathways for new thoughts. Your brain isn't rigid, it's shaped by your experiences. The second thing is that your thoughts control your reality. If you have the same thoughts, that's going to lead to the same mindset, and your mindset influences how you act, which then influences the circumstances you find yourself in, and therefore your reality. So we can see that your thoughts have a direct impact on your reality. Let's say you think you're shy. That's a thought, right? That's going to lead to the mindset that I am shy, I am awkward, I don't talk to people, I don't know how to initiate conversation, and so on. And then let's say if you're out at an event, that mindset is going to keep you in the corner of a room, not talking to anybody, because you'll feel very scared of having these interactions with others. And then because you didn't talk to anybody during that event, that's only going to reinforce the belief that you're shy and you're awkward and you can't make conversation. It's a self-reinforcing cycle. And the only way that you can stop it and change it to positively influence your reality is by starting at the root cause, which is your thoughts. The first important thing here is make sure that you're living in the present and not in the past, because often a thought that we have or a belief that we have originates from something that happened in the past. But if you define yourself by something that happened in the past, let's say you got dumped and you think you're unworthy, then you'll keep staying in that moment, in those same thoughts, and then in that same reality, even though on the scale of time, that event was already a long time ago. You'll keep staying in that moment instead of moving on. So to get out of this loop of negative thoughts and negative realities, you have to start living in the present and not in the past, and take control of your thoughts. Okay, now let's talk for a second about stress. You have a part of your nervous system called the sympathetic nervous system, which basically organizes the fight or flight response when you're stressed. Usually, a moment of stress doesn't last very long, but it has many effects. For example, it will stop digestion, conserve glucose, your pupils will dilate, your heart rate will increase. Basically, the energy in your body is going towards the sources that will need it for the stress response. That means it's not going to healthy things like digestion or recovery. Stress is when you're not in homeostasis. And to get out of stress, you need the help of the parasympathetic nervous system, which offsets the effects of the sympathetic nervous system by promoting resting and digestion throughout your body. But as I said before, stress is usually not something that lasts very long. However, in our society right now, a lot of people tend to be stuck in these cycles of long-term stress, in a period of prolonged anxiety and worry. But stress is depleting the essential organs in your body of the energy that they need, because obviously if you have a tiger in front of you, you're not going to be focusing on digestion. You're going to be sending that energy to your muscles so you can run faster, and to your heart so it can produce more oxygen for your muscles. But if you're in that state of stress for an extended period of time, this can lead to disease, because obviously no organism can sustain a long-term stress if it's not receiving the energy and the nutrients that it needs. So this goes back to what we talked about at the beginning, that your thoughts create your reality. Because if you're thinking these thoughts that keep you in a state of stress, that lead to you being put in experiences that only reinforce those stressful feelings. This is going to keep you in a state of long-term stress. Your body doesn't actually know the difference between lived experience and imagination. It doesn't have the ability to distinguish that. So even if you're thinking about something that happened 5 years ago, that was a negative experience, you're triggering the stress response in your body. And if those thoughts are repetitive, you're going to be in a state of long-term stress. This is where the surviving versus thriving from the title of this episode comes in. When you're in survival mode, you're stuck in these past negative experiences. You're trying to come back to the familiar, where you have control, instead of the unknown, where you don't have control, meaning you're going to stay stuck in that same repetitive cycle of stress and insecurity and lack of confidence. If you're always overthinking situations, living in the worst case scenario, this might be you. Some characteristics of this are often having negative emotions, selfishness, feeling depleted of energy, being narrowly focused, lack of creativity. On the other hand, thriving is living in a state of peace. You may still have some stress every once in a while, but it's not a constant state of stress, and it's being offset by your parasympathetic nervous system. You're living in the present. Your body's at homeostasis. You're healthy. You're able to repair, regenerate. You feel energized. You have positive emotions. You're selfless. All of these things are characteristics of somebody who is not just surviving, but thriving. So the one thing that is stopping people that are living in survival from thriving is really the thoughts that repeat themselves and that lead to us putting ourselves, honestly, in situations that only reinforce these beliefs. What we can control here is our thoughts. How can we start to become more aware of our thoughts to be able to control our reality? And the main thing here, I would say, is any activity where you're left alone with your thoughts. So this can be going on a mindful walk without listening to music or to a podcast, and just being alone with your thoughts, observing the world. And I know this is easier said than done, because when it actually comes to getting outside and not putting your AirPods in, it can feel really boring. But trust me, you start to actually notice things in your surroundings that are interesting, and new thoughts pop into your head that you wouldn't even have noticed, or that wouldn't have even come into your head if you were listening to this constant input of music or to podcasts. Sometimes it's nice to just take a moment to be with yourself and be with your thoughts and really observe. You can also try meditation. I definitely recommend that. Meditation is really helpful to become conscious of your unconscious habits, because you're being present you're being the observer of your thoughts. And that's the key. Once you're able to become conscious of what you're thinking constantly on a daily basis, that's where the power lies, because that's where you're able to change it. And even if you don't have a major revelation while meditating, it's still a very calming practice that turns on the parasympathetic nervous system and reduces stress. Some other practices that can help to reduce stress are reading. I find personally that reading is such a calming activity, especially reading fiction, because when you're reading nonfiction, it's great because you can learn a lot, but you're forced to take in information and to be consciously thinking about the text, while in fiction books, for entertainment and also for learning, you can just dive deep into flow state and just lose yourself in the story, which can be very calming and relaxing. I feel so recharged after I read. And for me, this experience just allows me to shut off my brain for a second and just explore another character's life. And then, of course, I'm literally going to mention this in every single episode, but journaling, because when you journal, I know in the beginning you might think that you have nothing to say, but you start writing and you just continue and you realize that there's actually so much to unpack that you wouldn't have even noticed if you hadn't taken the time to sit there with your thoughts and just let it all out. So, a quick recap: our thoughts control our reality because the same thoughts lead to the same mindset, the same actions, and the same experiences. And so if we're constantly thinking thoughts from a past negative experience or living in the state of stress, that's going to influence our reality, which will only reinforce these negative thoughts and keep us in a state of long-term stress. And it's a self-reinforcing cycle that continues unless we become conscious of these thoughts and do something to change them into more positive thoughts, more uplifting thoughts. And there are 4 main ways I suggest you can try: meditation, reading, journaling, and walks without headphones. And there you have it. That's it for today's episode. I hope you have a better idea now on how you can live and thrive and fully experience your full potential instead of living in survival and being stuck in a cycle of negative experiences and negative thoughts. Thank you very much for listening to Mind, Body, and Beyond. If you think this episode would be helpful to anybody, please share it with them. And if you have any suggestions or comments, you can always put them down in the comments. I love to read what you guys have to say. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next one.